once heard a story from another Episcopal priest named Sarah Condon. And according to Sarah, there was a church in the Diocese of Mississippi many, many years ago that had an Easter celebration not too unlike our celebration 2 weeks ago. The Flower Guild had spent hours perfecting the flowers behind the altar. It was beautiful. The Altar Guild had set up multiple communion stations throughout the church. As the prelude began, the ushers had already handed out 4 or 5 times as many bulletins as they would on a normal week. And then the acolyte team was lining up in the back, and there were so many acolytes that they could process not only 1, but 2 banners. People continued to trickle into the already packed sanctuary to find the last few seats available. And then the choir started singing. It was glorious. It was obvious that they had practiced for months for this one day, and there was trumpets and other musicians, and everyone could tell that this day was special. And then it came time for the sermon. And the priest climbs up into the pulpit, not unlike the pulpit I stand in now. And he spends a few moments in silence to gather the crowd, to build the tension in the room. And then he leans into the microphone. He says, "Happy Easter. It's all true. Amen." And then he climbs back down the pulpit, sits down, and waits for the rest of the service. Can you imagine if Penny had done that 2 weeks ago? I'm sure half of the people in this room would have been delighted they could have gotten to Easter brunch maybe 10, 15 minutes earlier. But the other half would have been in a state of disbelief. Where's the rest of the sermon? Everyone had put so much effort into this day. The Flower Guild, the Altar Guild, the ushers, the acolytes, the choirs, everyone on the church staff. Why didn't the preacher put in any more effort into this sermon? Maybe he'd run out of time to write a more lengthy sermon. Maybe he'd become so consumed with Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday, maybe an Easter Vigil, that he'd just run out of creative juice to write a bigger Easter sermon. But I suspect something else may have been going on beyond pure laziness. Because as it turns out, Jesus preaches a very similar sermon in today's gospel. Jesus shows up among the disciples in the flesh. They were terrified and startled, Luke tells us. And they thought they were seeing a ghost. So what does Jesus do? He draws them in. He shows them his hands and his feet, and in so doing, he whispers to them, "It's all true. It's all true." But then Luke tells us that even in their joy, they were disbelieving and wondering. And to be fair, why wouldn't they? People had died and stayed dead for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. People had died and stayed dead for their entire lives. Why should they expect anything to the contrary? Maybe this is a ghost. So Jesus tells them he's hungry. He asks them for some food, and they give him a piece of fish, and he eats it. If you've ever seen Ghostbusters, you know that ghosts can't eat food. It goes straight through them. But Jesus eats the fish. It's all true, he says again. It's all true. He doesn't waste words explaining how it's true or why it's true, just that it's true. And that was the sermon they needed to hear. We spend our entire lives learning to accept reality. And part of the reality we learn to accept is that death is final. But learning to accept that is really hard, isn't it? If you've ever lost a loved one, you know that there's a period of time, maybe it's days, maybe it's weeks, maybe it's years, when their passing doesn't feel real. In fact, the most common phrase I hear among grieving people is that it just doesn't feel real. We expect them to still be in the other room. We expect them to still be on the other end of the phone. We expect them to still be there on Christmas, on Easter, and on birthdays. But eventually, our brains slowly begin to adjust to the reality of the situation. They begin to accept what is real. But sometimes we need to be told not what is real, but what is true. And that there's a truth that's truer than the reality that we've learned to accept. And this is where we come to hear that truth. So when that Mississippi preacher stood up in the pulpit and preached a shockingly short sermon, I'm convinced he preached the sermon that we all truly need and we all truly crave to hear. It's a sermon that doesn't waste words explaining how it's true or why it's true, just that it's true. It's a sermon that's shocking enough to shake us from our day-to-day reality. It's a sermon that's absurd enough to reawaken us to the absurdity of a dead man coming back to life. It's a sermon that's scandalous enough to reawaken us to the scandal of Easter. Happy Easter. It's all true. Amen.